Let's talk about Star Wars Outlaws, okay? Number one, this is an article that I wrote over on .esports a little while back that I talked about Star Wars Outlaws really being the first open world Star Wars game, okay? I actually had a whole editorial that you could go read over there right now defining not only what is a true open world game, but why specifically this Star Wars game is the first one to do it and why it should be given credit for being the first Star Wars game that is actually an open world game, okay? The reason why this is a big deal is because Star Wars Outlaws really hits on all the points of being an open world game between the large space to explore, a lot of the places that you're going to be able to kind of like, really go off the beaten path and find other stuff that might be different than the main quest line. In addition to that, we also have the ability to go to space, to go between different planets, to explore. And on top of that, from my understanding, for what the developers over at Ubisoft and Massive Entertainment have talked about, a lot of things are going to be dynamic. And you're going to have an element of choice with certain elements going on in Star Wars Outlaws in the main game, as well as also with the gameplay itself. There's a lot of great stuff to look forward to with that, but Star Wars Outlaws is really truly the first open world Star Wars game. There's a lot of different Star Wars games that people point to that have said like, oh no, this is open world, and that is not necessarily the case. The main reason being is because everybody cannot agree on a lot of different stuff to defining what an open world game is. A lot of people have said KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 is open world. A lot of people have said Star Wars Galaxies is open world. A lot of people have said Star Wars Jedi Survivor is open world. And I can tell you right now, after doing the research and going through a lot of different stuff for all three of those games are not really open world games. Or at least they don't define what a true open world game would necessarily be. Just because you have a lot of space to explore, you have an open area to really travel around and kind of like interact with different things, that doesn't necessarily make it an open world game by definition, okay? Star Wars Galaxy is an MMO. One of the best MMOs out there, or one of the most classic MMOs out there for a lot of people, especially for Star Wars fans. The other one too, that gets brought up a lot, is the Old Republic, which is the one that's actively going on right now, because Galaxies is no longer around. Oh, the Old Republic is really the MMO that Star Wars fans play. And again, there's a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of places to go. However, it's not necessarily an open world game by definition, because not only is there multiple players that keep things kind of dynamic, but there are other players. By design, it's not made to be a world or an ecosystem that you can interact with like that is dynamic, constantly changing all the time. In much in the same way, the big kind of comparison that people go to when it comes to true open world games like No Man's Sky, games like Horizon Zero Dawn or Horizon Forbidden West, games like the Grand Theft Auto series, which kind of defines what the modern open world game is like. There are certain nuanced elements about open world games and about Grand Theft Auto specifically that really kind of put it way ahead of other games now that some people try to say is open world. The closest ones that I find for Star Wars games that are more closer to being an open world game was Jedi Survivor and Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. Here's the problem though, okay, for Star Wars fans, okay? The reason why, okay, Skywalker Saga and Jedi Survivor are not open world games compared to what this is going to be is because one, Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga is a sandbox game more than anything else. Even though there's a lot of places you could go to and a lot of places you could explore, it's not dynamic. It's fixed. They're static. They're things that you could go and interact with that are not necessarily dynamic like that. And what I mean by dynamic is things that are constantly changing all the time. That while certain positions of stuff might be there, like certain characters, objects, or whatever else, the interaction and the outcomes and the permutations of all those interactions and what you could do as the player are constantly changing. It's almost kind of like a roguelike where things are not necessarily the same every single time you go to the same spot. Okay, that's what really, for me anyway, personally, really helps define what an open world game is and what is not an open world outside of all these other things. And even with Jedi Survivor, it comes really close. And even I would almost in some instances categorize it as an open world game. But even the developers themselves, there's interviews that have floated around about Star Wars Jedi Survivor where they say it's not really an open world game. And for me, where it really clinches that is when you actually go to the meditation points and everything gets reset and goes back to the same fixed area or interactions or paths that the developers had there. It's the same thing with the Soulsborne games. Okay, it's Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring. There's an argument that could be made there. And some people would say Elden Ring is really an open world game. But There's a lot of little details that people constantly debate with it. But for the sake of our discussion, when it comes to Star Wars games, those to me are not true open world games. And what's going to separate those games from Star Wars Outlaws is that Star Wars Outlaws is hitting on every single point of trying to be a true open world game. And it's cool to see this because we're not only getting something different compared to some of the other Star Wars games we got of lately, but we're also getting something that is giving us stuff that we've asked for years. We're actually going to get a game that gives us a seamless transition from ground interaction or ground gameplay to space combat, to space gameplay and exploration. We saw that in the trailer for Star Wars Outlaws, and it is awesome. A lot of people are not as hyped as they probably should be about this. I mean, look at it. You got an open world game. When you go to planets, you get to explore everything that's going on in that planet. You get to have missions and quests, interactions with certain factions. They give you certain reputation of certain groups that are going after you or helping you out. And then you get to go to space seamlessly. Okay, or at least the transition is like, whatever animation. It goes from ground to space. And then all of a sudden you're flying around in space in your starship. Like that. And then being able to travel to other planets that you get to go do the same thing and explore all what they have to offer. This is what Star Wars fans, like myself, who play a lot of video games, have been asking for years. Ever since people wanted Star Wars Battlefront 3 to do that, which is what that game was going to do. And then, unfortunately, Star Wars Elite Squadron and, Elite Squadron and Renegade Squadron tried to do and didn't really do it all that well on the PSP. But this is what we are talking about. This is what we are getting with Star Wars Outlaws, and I am excited about that. That is really awesome, and I cannot wait to see that happen. But there's also one other thing we need to talk about with Star Wars Outlaws, which isn't as shiny as this other stuff. We really need to talk about this decisions thing, okay? Now, what am I talking about here, okay? Let me actually show you guys. This is an article over on Game Rant, okay? And you can find some of this stuff in other places as well, but Game Rant is the one I'm actually pointing to because it actually has it highlighted, right? There it is, okay? Players can make choices that will affect K-Vest's reputation with certain organizations and syndicates. So like the Hutts, maybe the Pikes. I'm hoping, God willing, okay? God, look at me right here, Star Wars fans. God willing, we get to see the Black Sun Syndicate in here, which means because this takes place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, that means that Shadows of the Empire elements can be implemented to this. Fingers crossed with this. But let me continue. That can make their reputation with certain organizations and syndicates. However, it has been confirmed that there aren't any branching narrative threads, that these choices don't affect the overall story of the game. Now, here's my problem with this, okay? The reason why I have a big issue with this whole stuff is because, unfortunately, even though we have choices with certain interactions with the main, organizations that we can interact with, my main issue is that those choices then become almost obsolete in the greater narrative of the game. We have examples of Star Wars games that give us alternate endings, and including Star Wars games that give us choices that lead to alternate endings or permutations for the outcome of the story. Again, we have games like Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, the game, which has 2 different endings depending on how you actually play that fight. We have the KOTOR games, 1 and 2, that give us different endings based on what type of path we do, what type of path we choose, or certain choices and interactions with different characters. This is possible. And I'm pretty sure there's other examples people could come up with. This is definitely possible. So if you're going to give us choices in a game, why not have those choices matter? Besides the reputation stuff, have it matter in the sense of like, okay, if I have a really terrible reputation with a certain syndicate, like if I'm just being a jerk to them and I'm like hindering their progress and their plans, how about those missions don't open up to me because of that? Or I get a different outcome with certain squabbles between syndicates and factions where I support one faction or the other that affects the outcome of the overall game, or at least affects an epilogue. If you guys have ever played The Witcher 3, a perfect example, depending on what you do, granted, we have certain endings for Geralt in whatever that he does, but there's also certain side quests that you could do, depending on how you actually approach them, where you get a different epilogue and a different outcome at the very end of the game before the credits roll. Why not have something like that? If I want to support the Hutts, right? If I decide to support Jabba the Hutt, if I want to work with him and get paid by the Hutts, right? Okay? I should be able to get one outcome, right? But if I decide to portray Jabba the Hutt and become a real pain in the butt to him, that actually maybe causes some of the stuff that affects Return of the Jedi in some way, I should see something like that. My choices should matter in a greater way than just having like certain groups be a little bit more annoying to me or not during gameplay. Make the choices matter. Make the choices have more weight. Make the choices something more significant than just being there for the sake of being there. That's my biggest thing. Everything else about Star Wars Outlaws, I'm really looking forward to. I'm really excited about that. But that is the one specific thing for Kay Vess and her companions and Nix and stuff that I feel like is a dropped ball. Because granted, again, I don't know how tough it is to develop games. Even though I play a lot of video games, I don't know about development as much as some of the people that are actually making the games. But that does feel like that should be something that should be talked about. You know, especially with players who have wanted more choice in certain games to be more impactful, to at least, you know, have it be, if I'm part of this open world, you know, let whatever it is I do really affect that open world and really become a thing that could really be special for a lot of people. Again, this game is going to be big. It's going to be massive. It's coming out in 2024. It's already been confirmed by multiple places, including the official Disney Parks blog, where they did a whole blog post about big things coming in 2024, and Star Wars Outlaws was right there, confirms. They did, however, change that it was supposed to be either later 2024, but it got changed out because they're not sure when exactly it's going to drop. At least according to them, right? I really do hope it's earlier in 2024, but I digress, okay? Bottom line, Star Wars Outlaws is going to be a big deal for a lot of people, especially for me. Let me know your thoughts about Star Wars Outlaws down below in the comment section. Are you excited for the game? Are you going to be picking up day one? Are you going to wait it out? Are you a little disappointed about some stuff with Star Wars Outlaws? What are some of the actual things that you think are good or bad about Star Wars Outlaws, at least from what we know right now, having seen gameplay of it from the reveal trailer, the developer walkthrough, and all that stuff, and everything else that's been reported in many different gaming websites.